Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. We've got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty leagues, PPR leagues, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, hosted by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm their host, Ethan Orfe, back again as always. And, new year, new me, as everybody would like to say. It's probably the same old me. You want to make yourself better. So hopefully, cheers to a new year. Hope everybody had a safe New Year's celebration, a safe New Year's Day. And hope everybody's ready for some more football conversation, as I am. I'm so excited. The playoffs are back, and they're going to start off with some good games. We have a good matchup for Saturday in the first game slot. The 4:25 Saturday game hasn't always been the best, and it seems to always feature about the same type of teams in the past few years. But this one I'm actually really excited about. Now, I've been on record a few times talking about how I feel like this Bills team has been a bit undervalued and underrated going throughout the season, and I think that their defense is really for real, and Josh Allen has been able to make a few plays here or there despite his struggles in the accuracy department. I have a lot of faith in this Bills team to not really make a super deep run, but to be competitive and to make a lot of things interesting on the football field from fantasy perspectives, gambling perspectives. They're a fun team to watch, and they just are an interesting team. They're my favorite team to watch in the AFC, besides like the big market teams, or not big market, but the big presence teams like the Kansas Cities with the Pat Mahomes is, and the Lamar Jacksons of the world and all that stuff. So I really, really enjoy this Bills team, and they're going up against another team that I enjoy watching is the Texans. And I think a lot of people are starting to pencil in the Texans as the victor in this situation. And I'm not too sure that is the case. Also, another game coming up after that on Saturday is, of course, the Patriots versus the Titans. Now, that's a game that I can't wait to get into. But we're going to go back to the Bills first. We're going to talk about some Bills football, some Houston football, that matchup. So Saturday, 4:25 Eastern Standard Time, if you live on the East Coast, it will be the first playoff game, and I honestly can't wait to watch it because there's a lot of things that I think are necessary to look at for that matchup per se, and they all really kind of depend on injuries and who is available to play at what level of ability they're available to play at. So first is J.J. Watt. I believe Bill O'Brien has stated that J.J. Watt will probably play. Doesn't know in what capacity that he'll see some playtime on the field. So I don't know if he'll be situational or if he will tough it out and play majority of the snaps of the game. But having J.J. Watt on the defense is a game changer for Houston. And it's necessary for their defense to actually really get active out there because we have known that Houston is a weird team when it comes to personnel. If one or two people from their personnel is just not available, they are a different team. And I really think that at a certain point in time, their defense has just not looked the same without J.J. Watt out there. And that's not saying anything super significant. I mean, J.J. Watt is a really, really good pass rusher. He's probably going to be in the Hall of Fame for his numbers that he's put up over his career in Houston. So that's like saying water is wet. But at the same time, it's he's very important to that defense in the sense of if you need him to push you over the edge, this would be the game to do it, because I don't think this is a pushover game. Just like how they rested so many players the last week against the Titans because they didn't need the game, every game counts now. So they definitely, if J.J. Watt is ready to play and he feels like he can go, they have no choice but to play him. Because you have to try and win in this league, and there's only one game per playoff round, and you just got to do what you got to do. Same thing with Will Fuller. Will Fuller changes that offense to a whole another dynamic. He takes the top off the defense. He makes people respect his speed. And honestly, if he plays, I'm still not sure if he's going to be as effective as we need him to be, or as Houston would need them to be, per se. Just because if it's a hamstring injury like it has been, those are really tricky injuries, and I don't know just how 100% he'll be. I think he'll probably be closer to 75 if he plays. There hasn't been any discussion. He had limited practices for the past couple of days, so I'm not too sure if he's going to be ready to go. And so is Laramie Tunzel. He's been limited in practice as well, and he's a big part of that offensive line and keeping Deshaun Watson safe and sound. So what does that tell me about what Houston's going to try and do? I think Houston's going to try and run the football a lot, just because they've been doing it a lot more recently, and I think Carlos Hyde wants the touches, and I think he's earned the right to get the ball a little bit more in that offense and not be so heavily on Deshaun Watson making the super plays, because that's what we've been used to since he's been there on the Texans, and that only can get you really so far, especially if you're playing down, and if Deshaun hasn't been the best version of himself in the past few weeks, due to having so many inconsistencies in the starting lineups and trying to get rhythms going, and they're not really the team that's catching heat this at the end of the road. So consistency and knowing what you have is super important in these type of playoff situations. So I am kind of concerned about the Texans' outcome here, just because if they start out down, I don't know if they're going to be able to battle their way back up easily. I think they need to take control of the game really early, and that way they can really, really command their own tone, set their own tone. So on the other side, we have, of course, the Bills, who really like to set the tone no matter what game situation they are in. The last few games that I've been watching the Bills play in, where they played the Patriots and they played the Pittsburgh Steelers and Dallas, it's just been interesting games to watch them play in, just because they try to establish an identity in those games of what they wanted to accomplish, and they made it hard for every single team to establish their own identity, and it was tough games each time played. And they like hard-nosed, tough football games because they know how to compete in them. They don't always win them, but they're always in it. That's the one thing that the Bills have been doing all season long, is staying in high-profile, tough games. They don't they don't get blown out really ever. Their defense is really for real. Tre'Davious White is an all-pro cornerback, in my opinion. If Shaq Lawson plays, he's a big part of that defensive line, that front seven. And to be honest, I really think that Bills Mafia is being a little bit undervalued, and it needs to be. They're probably going to try and come out like gangbusters. I don't think they're going to be throwing the football up and down the field like maniacs, because that's just not something they do. But John Brown is a really good weapon. He's fast. He can break down the secondary. If Josh Allen can be accurate and really get the ball downfield and really read the game and not just be a typical game manager, but have an impact, because he already has impacts with his legs and being able to keep plays alive. But if he can really get the ball down the field and force that defense to respect him in the passing game, it's going to be a really, really interesting game to watch, because I think it's already shown that someone like Delvin Singletary in the backfield is really hard for defenses to handle. He's one of those Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, just one of those types of running backs who can do it both ways in the passing game and in the running game. And when you have that in the flats and running routes, that can really be tough for defenses to accommodate for, especially when you have other weapons that you can throw the ball to. Not to mention, This isn't a situation where a quarterback is just strictly a pocket passer and isn't looking to get out into the second level and start running when he doesn't see anything going down. He can get there. Josh Allen can get out there and start running. And when he does that, oh man, it's ridiculous. He can really look to pick up some good yardage, and he'll put different types of pressures on that defense. So I think that looking ahead, I'm not going to say it's an easy pick no matter what, but I think I have the Bills in this one, and I guess an upset because a lot of people are picking the Texans, but I think the Bills might be able to pull out this first round upset, and I think that's where I'm going to leave that one. Coming up after this break, we're going to talk about the Patriots and the Titans, and we're just going to see where those matchups are going to be best exploited, and who do we really look at to see who needs to step up as far as the Patriots' offensive struggles and where the Titans really have a chance in this game, and I think they have a really strong chance. So that's coming up right after this break.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, so we're back again. Let's go ahead and get into what is the next Saturday game, the night game, which are just two good slated games. I'm still trying to recover from the fact that we're going to have really two good games ready to watch Saturday before we even get to the Sunday games. And they're both AFC, so they did the AFC 2 games and NFC 2 games, which is interesting because they usually have one or the other. But Patriots, Titans, what to expect, what to look for, what is going to happen. So the Miami game had so much on the line that no one really wanted to think about because we didn't think Miami would beat them, especially go toe to toe in week 17 with the Patriots. And I think this that game really talks about the Patriots' weaknesses and struggles over the season that everybody was kind of alluding to over the season in small bits and pieces. And, there's been think pieces and analytics about their offensive struggles and why someone like Gronk was so important over the years, just because it just opened up the field. It wasn't just the fact that Gronk was Brady's number one target. It was the fact that outside of Gronk, it just made everybody else so much better. He just the spacing on the field was just so important for Tom Brady to really get people open, because we've all recognized that without Gronk, they really haven't had the top tier wide receiver talent in a long time. Probably never since Randy. Ever since Randy was gone, their wide receiver core has not been the most talented and hasn't been. I guess maybe Antonio Brown is one, but he played one game, so we don't really throw that in there. But ever since Gronk has retired, and whenever Gronk wasn't healthy, you could really see that the Patriots didn't have the best wide receiver group. And honestly, their best wide receiver outside of Julian Edelman this year has been James White, a running back. James White. And you would think Sony Michel would be able to catch something out the backfield, but he can't do that. That's why it's been so polarized. Like, if you didn't have Sony Michel and James White in fantasy, you're kind of hurt, because Sony Michel was definitely a 2-down back, and they would bring James White in to catch the ball out the backfield. And you would know, as a defense, that there's no way in the world that you're passing the ball with Sony Michel because he just can't catch out the backfield. He's just not that good in the passing game. And you knew if James White was in the game, it was going to probably be a pass. And you just had to be mentally prepared for that if you've been watching film. So what does that really mean for a Patriots team going up against a Titans team that, to be honest, seems to be peaking at the right time? I'm not too sure. If the Titans defense, which is scrappy, they're not the best, but they're not the worst, they're okay. If they can get some stops, if Miami can get some stops against the Patriots, I think Tennessee has a strong chance of getting some stops. So let's say I can see some really big moments in this game where Tennessee has a strong chance to make some noise. Now, it's so difficult. Everybody says it's so difficult to go up against Bill Belichick coach teams in the playoffs. They've been there so many times. They've been in almost every single playoff situation possible, and they just know how to get the job done and get a win, right? So I understand. I get it. I get the notion that it's sacrilegious to go up against Bill Belichick in tough games, just like it's sacrilegious to go up against I guess Urban Meyers or the disciples of the Bill Belichicks in college football, like a Nick Saban, for instance. No one goes up against Nick Saban when it comes to Alabama sports or Alabama football, Alabama sports. But there are times where things might be changing. And I think right now, the Patriots' weaknesses on their offense is real. It's real. Their wide receivers are not good enough. They can't get separation. They drop balls. Brady's not in sync with them. I don't think he trusts them. It's all out of whack. And they're going into the playoffs. They haven't figured it out. This isn't the Patriots have figured it out over the last couple of years where they start off kind of rough. We don't know if this is the end of Tom Brady. Oh, he looks like he's a 40-year-old. And then by week 13, week 12, they figured it out. They haven't figured it out on offense. Their defense has been good all year. But even them, that side of the ball, you can't even say that they've been as shut down as they were week 5 of the season compared to now. Any team that starts off really good defensively will eventually break down as the season goes on. No one stays as strong defensively unless you're Hall of Fame level defensive teams. Like you are the best defense that ever were to play. Like you're in that conversation. If you can stay healthy throughout the whole season, play the same level of defense throughout the whole season, it's just too tough to do now because offenses are so good, so potent, so efficient. They can score at will sometimes. It's so difficult in this time, in this day and age, for defenses to really be as impactful as they were. So when defenses start off strong, it's really easy for them to teeter off just because there's more film. You know what to attack. You know their weaknesses. And it was really interesting to watch what Miami did against the Patriots last week, where they just threw at Stephon Gilmore. Stephon Gilmore is a defensive player of the year candidate before this game. He still is. I'm not one of those people who are going to say that, oh man, now he definitely can't win it. And to be honest, I don't know if he was going to win it outright in the first place before this game. But it does make you question that not a lot of teams were willing to throw Stephon Gilmore's side. And to be honest, the Patriots haven't faced super top tier quarterbacks all year. They faced a couple good ones. They faced Mahomes. They faced Lamar. They faced some good quarterbacks, but they haven't faced all elites because that's just hard to do. There's not that many elite quarterbacks in the league anyway. And I'm not saying Ryan Fitzpatrick is elite in the longest stretch. He's decent. He's good. He's good enough. But he attacked. The thing about it is they showed no fear. Because what did they have to lose? They had nothing to lose. And they let Devontae Parker, who, in my opinion, was somebody who should have been sought after in trades, but I guess they weren't trying to trade him because they knew what they had. I think someone like the Saints or someone like the Patriots definitely needed a Devontae Parker in their wide receiver core because he's really good. And he showed it on display. He went toe-to-toe with Stephon Gilmore, and Stephon Gilmore just couldn't handle him that day. I don't know if it was a bad day or what, but people have definitely looked at him a bit differently since then. All right, I should probably talk a little bit more about the Titans' chances of winning this game. If the Titans play the way they have been the past few weeks, which have been, they've played really good. They've had some bad breaks go their way, especially that first game against Houston. Not the one from last week, but the weeks prior, where they just had some tough breaks, and Houston came out with that one. They really have played really well. Tannehill has played really well. Derrick Henry is probably the best running back in the playoffs right now, in my opinion. Who would you really take over him at this point, especially when the offense is tailor-made for him to succeed? I don't know. So their wide receivers are getting really, 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 really good looks. I like A.J. Brown a lot. Big wide receiver. Same place as DJ Metcalf has come out of. And that's going to be an interesting matchup to see if they put A.J. against Stephon Gilmore and match him up with that size and that catch radius. We're going to see a battle. If he's ready, if AJ is ready, he's a rookie, so if he's ready for prime time, so to speak, that's going to be interesting to see. And I just don't think Tennessee tries to beat themselves. If Tennessee doesn't beat themselves, they're going to be in this game. I don't know if they're going to win. I really have a hard time picking a game here. So I would suppose that picking the Patriots is the safest option, just because it just makes you feel better about yourself. And you don't always want to be the hot take guy and pick the underdog just because you want to be contrarian and you don't want to follow everybody else, or you want to get clicks, or however your thought process may go. But it really is just a tough game. If they can exploit the Patriots' weaknesses on offense, and maybe Tom isn't playing the best Tom game, you never really know what can happen in this game. So if I was a gambling man, I wouldn't even know what to do. I'd probably take the under in points, and maybe Tennessee does pull it out. Who knows? But coming up next after this coming break, we're going to go to the Sunday games and look at what the Saints have to do against Minnesota, and of course what the Seahawks have to do if they want to win against the Eagles, and vice versa. That's coming up right after this.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, so welcome back. We're going to go ahead and get into the next matchup on the sheet. That will be the Minnesota Vikings versus the Saints. Saints have home field for this game. We're going to talk about Minnesota first, just because if you know me well enough, I can talk about the Saints all day. So I don't want to go ahead and do that too much. So let's talk about Minnesota and what they have to do against Saints offense that seems to be heating up at the right time, and what their offense needs to do, as in Minnesota's, that would need to expose what the Saints' weaknesses are on the defensive end of the field. So it looks like Dalvin Cook might be ready to come back. He looks like he's going to play. I don't think a lot of people are expecting him not to play. I think he was going to play probably regardless, and that's why the rest day was so important for Minnesota last week. And we're just going to have to see what happens on that front as far as running backs concerned, because clearly, especially after watching that Monday Night Green Bay game, we can see that Dalvin Cook makes that offense a different offense, and it makes Kirk Cousins more comfortable when he has him in. It makes the offense flow better. It gets people more open because he can catch out the backfield too. He's a really, really good complete running back in this league and can do all the things that running backs are asked to do in today's NFL. So, what does that mean about their chances of beating the Saints? It really depends on which Kirk Cousins shows up. Now, some people are saying this is a good thing that Kirk Cousins is not playing in a primetime scenario, because Kirk Cousins in primetime games has been abysmal. I don't think he's won a primetime game in his career, which is saying something. And honestly, it did not look good Monday night either, because they had really all the chances in the world to win that game. And Aaron Rodgers did not have the best game. It took a while for that Green Bay offense to really get things going in the run game and stuff clicking. So there was ample chances. That defense made a lot of stops for Kirk Cousins and the offense to really capitalize, and it just didn't happen. So I believe that we're going to see a Kirk Cousins who understands where he needs to take this team. They paid him that contract because they knew he was good enough to get them this far. Now it's time to see if he can play beyond that. And I think that's been his calling card his whole career, is can he play beyond the quarterback that can just get you there, can kind of just get you by, the get you by guy. No one really likes the get you by guy. The guy who just wants to get there. No one likes that. No one likes seeing that. The archetype's been overplayed. You see it in all different types of stuff. Like last night, I was watching, was it Iron Chef? I think with my girlfriend, and there was this guy on one of the newer seasons on Hulu. He just wanted to stay in the game, per se. He wanted to play it safe. And he was one of the first people to almost be voted off in the first episode, because he just didn't try enough. He didn't go as hard as he could. He didn't pull out his best dish, and the chefs immediately picked up on that. And if it weren't for the fact that there was somebody who did even worse than he did, he probably would have been the first one gone. So that's just a little tidbit of something that I did over the break. But the same rules apply to Kirk Cousins in these football game, big game scenarios. You gotta try. I guarantee you, if Kirk Cousins was in that game 2 years ago with the Minneapolis Miracle, I don't think the miracle happens. Because what did Case Keenum have to lose at that moment in time? I guess the game, but in reality, at that point, everyone thought the game was over. So he just chucked it up. I don't even know if Kirk Cousins could do that. It really looks like he cares so much about perfect passer ratings and not throwing it down the field that if it's not the perfect pass, he's not going to do it. And I think teams that play aggressive, especially someone like a Saints defense that a lot of people, they play really aggressive to the point to where it can kind of hinder them in many different scenarios. Dennis Allen has the tendency to blitz in weird times that you wouldn't think somebody would blitz at. And sometimes it pays off. Sometimes it really kills them at the back end in the secondary. But, I think that they're going to ramp it up against a team that's ran by Kirk Cousins, because you never really know. And it's crazy, their wide receivers are really good. Adam Thielen is really good. Stephon Diggs is really good, and he might be really underrated as a wide receiver talent altogether, because he has all the tools that you want out of a number one wide receiver. And for the past few years, some people have saw him as the number two guy, and that might just not be the case, especially this season where he seemed to have stepped up a bit. So I think that offense really has to set the tone for themselves if they really want to come out and make this upset, and maybe make some people think that the Minneapolis Miracle may not have it definitely was a miracle that game, but maybe instead of thinking of the Saints lost that game, maybe they should be thinking that Minnesota won that game, because they can prove something here. On the Saints side of things, this is a game of demons for the Saints. This is the Saints are in the path to where they can have a revenge tour of a playoff run, where all their demons, besides maybe the Rams demon of losing last year, can be kind of rectified, and maybe it could be one of those things where they get closure in so many different forms and fashions. So they beat Minnesota this week. There's a chance that they can play the 49ers at some point in this playoff run. If they beat the 49ers, that could rectify as well that 2011 loss where the catch part 2 happened. I remember that game. Jimmy Graham scored like a 46-yard touchdown reception, and then at the end, like in typical Saints fashion, we couldn't get a stop, and they went and scored. Vernon Davis, the whole lot, and Alex Smith. It was a tough game for young Ethan back in those streets. So it's just no one has really forgotten, as Saints followers, some of the tough playoff losses. You never really forget those. So it's just interesting to see that a lot of things are lining up for the Saints, narrative-wise, to make some interesting win scenarios, as this season has been really similar to the 2011 season, as they went 13-3, and they did not get a bye, just like this time in that year. So what do they need to do to beat Minnesota? And I think what they need to do is to make sure that they get Jared Cook involved in the offense early, because Jared Cook, all that being said of Michael Thomas being amazing, we all know about Alvin Kamara really resurging back into the offense and the later stages really catching on fire. We know about Taysom Hill being the Swiss Army knife of this team, but Jared Cook is what makes this offense good to great, because when Jared Cook is on, nobody knows what to do. Everybody's been saying for the past few years that they need another piece on the wide receiver group, which I wouldn't argue against. They still kind of need another piece to help Michael Thomas out and to make things easier on him. But no one has really talked about the fact that Jared Cook might be that piece right now, that you have to pick and choose who you're going to double. Are you going to double Jared Cook to potentially give Michael Thomas some one-on-one situations? Or are you going to double Alvin Kamara? Or are you going to double Michael Thomas, who seems to, even if you double him, you can't guard him, so he'll catch the ball anyway? And that offense just needs to get, if you can get Jared Cook involved, that offense is a different level, and it's a championship-level offense. The defense, however, with the defensive front seven has taken a lot of big hits. Sheldon Rankins hurt. Davenport seems to be out for the year. It's going to be really tough for that defense to get some pressure up front to help that secondary out. And I know we got acquisitions as far as another cornerback in Janoris Jenkins, and we only have seen him play for 1 week or so we're going to have to wait and see how that works out for him. But if the team can just keep it together, don't give up the big plays, because that's what the Saints defense has been notorious for in the past, is that when they needed a big stop or they needed a drive, because they can get some stops on defense. They're not horrible. They can get some decent stops. But it's always the most inopportune times where the stops can't be had. And maybe this is a sign that every Saints fan knows, is at the end, when it's close to game finishing, the Saints may get the game-winning drive prepared. Drew Brees is never going to put the Saints in a position where they can't get the game-winning drive. But it's been common knowledge that if the Saints score too fast, you can't expect the win. It's hard. It's hard as someone who watches that team knows that if you give the other team a minute, it's very possible, and we're not up 7, it's very possible that this team can give up a loss on the defensive side of the ball. It's happened for many years. It still seems to be these weird legacy issues on that, and I don't know why that is the case, but it would be really difficult for me not to pick the Saints in this game, just because I feel like quarterbacks win games when it comes to playoffs. The best quarterback wins, or not all the time, but most of the time the best quarterback can find a way to get it done. So I would rather take the veteran Drew Brees over Kirk Cousins, who just has not been able to show that he can get this done at this stage of the game. So coming up after this break, We're going to talk about the night game, Eagles versus Seattle, and see what those two teams need to really do to potentially move on to the next round. And that's coming up.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Okay, welcome back. Last time we talked about what each team in the first NFC matchup on Sunday would have to do to try and bring home the W to get to the next round. And now we're going to talk about the Eagles versus Seattle. Now, this game is a bit interesting because there's so many. Both of these teams are really hurt. And to be honest, that's not an excuse, or I don't use it as an excuse for teams to not be able to come out and win some games. But there's a rare occurrence that that injuries play such a huge part in points of when we get to this point in the NFL, just because everybody's hurt in the NFL at this point in the game. Nobody's 100% healthy. Everybody's depth charts are getting really thin, and that's why the game is so much as a war of attrition as it is just game plan and schemes, because if you don't have the depth, you're not in the same competitive level as other teams. If you're small at other positions, as far as players that can sit there and play on the championship run team, you understand that limits you in certain aspects of the game. So that's why drafting is still so important. That's why picking people up in free agency is so important, and people who are available to play, that can play. Regardless, both of these teams are really hurt in certain positions. As you saw, Michael Kendricks is out for the season with a torn ACL. And the Eagles have a plethora of injuries all over the place. And a lot of people questionable to play. Miles Sanders did not practice on Wednesday. You are seeing so many different players on the Eagles side of the ball who have had to step up, such as a Boston Scott and other people in that wide receiving core who really, you could say they just kind of picked them up off the side of the road, but that'd be kind of disrespectful to them because they've actually shown up and they've played NFL football. And I think it's time. People. Please give Carson Wentz some respect. Plenty of my my friends who are Eagles fans, people who I associate with who are Eagles fans, some have been hit or miss on Carson Wentz this season. I have been one to support Carson Wentz since the beginning because I felt like his talent was really good. He's always been really good, and he just hasn't, when it came to him, he hasn't been healthy all the time. And when he has been healthy, his team has not been healthy. And now I think he's figured it out as a quarterback, what he needs to do to get his team in the position to win. Sometimes it's not always about making the A-Rod type of plays. I think the league has changed a bit in some fashion. You still want a quarterback that can make all the throws, make everything happen, like a Mahomes, like a A-Rod in his prime. But that's just not what you need to win. Never really has been all you need to win. Not to make them all the time. A-Rod, at a certain point in his career, had to make them all the time. Drew Brees had to make them all the time in New Orleans. Patrick Mahomes hasn't had to make them all the time, but last year when his defense was not the best and couldn't get any stops, he had to make a lot of plays on him, and it wasn't that defense getting them to the next close to the promised land. It was Patrick Mahomes and offense and Andy Reid and all that. So I say that to say that I think that Philly has found a nice balance with Carson Wentz, and they know what he's capable of. He can make big plays, he can make big throws, That throw he had in the end zone where it rifled between two defenders to get to the wide receiver in the corner was just insane. I don't think we talked about that throw enough. Like, it was a beautiful throw. And not that many quarterbacks in the league can make that throw. So Carson Wentz is talented. He has the arm strength, the capabilities. He can make throws like that all the time if he has the chance to. Well, let me not say all the time. He has the ability all the time to make those type of plays. But he shouldn't be asked to do that all the time. He doesn't have to be superhuman all the time. And that's where he got in trouble in early parts of the season, where he was trying to do so much because he felt like that's what he needed to do. And maybe he, when having a MVP level season, his early part of his career really kind of set him back as far as progression is concerned, because people say that he hasn't returned to that level since the injury, and that's fair to say because he hasn't. But I don't think that means that he has to necessarily get there right now, and especially with a team that really they need him to manage the game. And just because the term game manager has been kind of derogatory towards quarterbacks in recent years, I don't think that that's a bad thing per se, according to Carson Wentz, because it's funny to just look at the quarterback he's going up against in Russell Wilson. The majority of his first few years as quarterback were being a game manager, managing the game. He wasn't the Russell Wilson that we know today, the MVP caliber Russell Wilson. He was good. He was available to start. Like, imagine being a mid-tier pick and taking a job from somebody who they paid like $70 million the off-season coming in. And he took his job to be a game manager. Just what they paid him to do. That's just interesting to think about. And it's funny how Carson Wentz's scenario was he was drafted in the first round. And, of course, he got hurt. And then after that, they still won the Super Bowl because they had a guy who was able to manage the game, and they made the offense around them in Nick Foles really, really about him and how he was able to run that offense because they made it specifically towards him. So now I think that the offense is running through Carson Wentz in a way to where he doesn't have to be superhuman. And I think that has made him a much, much better quarterback. And I think a lot of people are seeing the old Wentz come back in bigger strides now, and they're starting to see why he's so talented and why people really didn't give up on him in the first place. So shout out to Carson Wentz. I think he's been really good in this back half of the season, and I think he's starting to prove a lot of the doubters not necessarily wrong, but they're starting to show the doubters why people believed in him in the first place. Does that mean that this team is going to win? I don't know. It's hard to say, just because the team is so decimated on so many different sides of the football field. And not to say that Seattle also isn't, but if there's one thing I know that Seattle isn't going to do is whine about it and quit. Pete Carroll is a great head coach. He gets their team ready no matter what situation. And we already know what their struggles are. Their offensive line isn't that great. Russell Wilson is running, dodging, ducking his way, and he's barely making throws behind the line of scrimmage these days. And he's trying to make everything happen because he kind of has no choice. Now, the wide receiver group is looking decent. DJ Metcalf looks like the guy who people didn't think he was going to be, which is interesting. I thought he was going to be really good. And a lot of people thought he was just a big guy who could run in a straight line, but clearly he's a big-time target for Russell Wilson. He went to him many times on that last drive to try to seal the deal against the 49ers, but it just came up quite short, probably due to management by Pete Carroll rather than just the team playing in general. But I digress. Tyler Lockett is a big-time wide receiver threat. And Philly's secondary has been documented, and people have known it for quite some time that their secondary isn't the best. So looking at what they need to do this time around, it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen out of this game, because I really don't know who brings it. Because I think both teams are they're kind of like the stray dog There's like two stray dogs going up against each other. So who's going to pull it out? Really? Who wants to survive and keep playing? Who's going to crack first? There's no game plan to how to stop these teams per se, because at the end of the day, both of these teams are kind of just making it work. No matter what happens, like if there was a game plan to beat somebody, you'd think that a better team would have done it by now, right? So something like the Eagles going up against the Cowboys. The Cowboys shouldn't have lost that game. They had no reason to go out and lose that game. They just didn't want it enough, in my opinion. So when you have a team that wants it enough and they know who they're playing with, they know who they're playing for, a lot of things are possible, and you can't rule out anything in these type of games. So I don't really know who's going to come out and win this game, but it's going to be fun to watch. I can't wait to see it. I hope Carson Wentz and Russell Wilson have a game of their lives and be able to really show why they're so valued in this league, in my opinion. So coming up next, after this break, we're going to talk a little bit more about some quarterbacks, specifically fantasy related, because I think quarterbacks are starting to become a little bit more valuable, and we're going to look at what we have to do in the drafts next year, and just where do quarterback ones, if you're even in one of those weird quarterback 2 leagues where you play 2 at the same time, where they just rank in drafting them. So that's coming up right after this break.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football, from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
All right, welcome back. So last time we talked about some matchups involving the Eagles and Seattle. That's going to be a really good matchup for the night game on Sunday. But now I'm going to look a little bit more into the future for fantasy football's sake when it comes to drafting, team building, all of that, this and the third. And this is typically more of a conversation for people who go draft to draft and isn't a keeper league or isn't in a dynasty league, or so to speak. So this is more for you draft your team 1 year, start over, draft again, because 9 times out of 10, if you're in a keeper league and you found a quarterback that fits for you and you like their game, you keep them for the X amount of seasons you're allowed to keep them for anyway. So the topic of today, that I think probably my favorite segment today, is going to be about Lamar Jackson. What about Lamar Jackson makes him so special, especially for fantasy? Because Lamar had a insane fantasy season, right? Insane. And if you didn't have Lamar Jackson at quarterback, whenever you played against him, you just kind of knew it was over, right? not for the week. You never know what could happen, but you just knew it was going to be a tough week, because a lot of people weren't drafting Lamar in their first rounds. They weren't drafting Lamar in the first 3 rounds, really. Some people were holding him back, and they didn't really know what was going to happen. But you knew he was getting drafted maybe 5, maybe 4 at the highest. And then you look back at Mahomes. I knew people who were drafting Pat Mahomes in the first round, second round, because of what he did the season prior. So he didn't have the Pat Mahomes season we all expected him to have this season because of injuries and from his side to other people on the offensive side and inconsistencies and such like that. So he didn't have the explosion that we were predicting for him to have this season. So if you draft him early, I'm sorry, it doesn't always work out. Better luck next time. I drafted him not that early. I'm pretty sure I drafted him maybe round 5, something like that. And it didn't even work out for me that much. I had to had to start a different quarterback. I had the security pick, I call him, Josh Allen, because I knew I was getting 17 points at least every week for the most part. And he got me 17 points every week. Josh Allen, the man for the people, your poor man's Lamar Jackson. I don't know about that one. Probably not. He's probably a little bit less than that. Poor man's Lamar Jackson. Regardless, this is what I want to talk about. Because these people at the quarterback position who can run the football and really run, like get some yardage. So we're talking about the prime Cam Newtons, the Michael Vick when he returned, now Lamar Jackson. Even, let's see, who else can really get out there and kind of run a little bit in her own right? Even someone like Kyler Murray, who was a rookie, definitely runs around a lot as well. Mariota, when he was playing, he wasn't the best, but he could run. Ryan Tannehill is a bit mobile sometimes. So let's look at this. Where do we take Lamar in next year's draft? And also, what does this mean for all these other quarterbacks who are considered sort of dual threats in their own right? I think it's time to really look at the quarterback position as a whole and their value and what they bring. Because I'm not sure if there's going to be another player like Lamar Jackson who probably is going to go in the first round again, and probably Mahomes is going to go in the first or second round again in many leagues, just because of the fact of their point potential can definitely reach a place where you just think that you're doing yourself a disservice, right? So let's say this year you drafted Odell Beckham Jr. in the first round. You would have done better drafting Lamar Jackson. If you drafted Jarvis Landry, you would have done better drafting Lamar Jackson. If you would have drafted X amount of players in the first round, David Johnson, you would have done better drafting Lamar Jackson. Now, I'm not saying that you are bad for drafting these players because you projected them to have better time or better stats, thus better fantasy points. Your season's probably derailed to some degree because said players did not play the best. And this is all revisionist history at the end of the day. And it's almost sacrilege to think that you should be drafting a quarterback in the first round anyway, especially if you are in like a snake draft where you are not bidding every draft pick. So there's no, you get one pick and that's it. So let's really think about this now. Is it fair to think that Lamar Jackson should be a first overall, not first overall, but a first round pick? So let's say it's like a 12-man league, so a pretty standard league amount of people playing, right? I just have it hard to believe that someone's not going to roll the dice if they're in a snake draft in their last pick to pick Lamar. At least their last pick of the first, or they're starting at the second round, right? There's just no way he doesn't go. He's too dynamic. He's too good. If he can even have 85% of what he's done, that's a decent pick. That's really good. And let's be honest here. People have been working the waiver wire for years, and this year was no different. People, that drafting is like 75%. The rest is knowing how to manage your team week to week and just looking at matchups, who's going to play, who's going to not. And at the end of the day, quarterback is the one position where you feel like everybody should be stable. You shouldn't have to worry about it too much unless something catastrophic happens, a la Pat Mahomes going down. So in reality, what are you not gaining from getting Lamar Jackson in the first round? You already know what his potential is. We've probably seen the best Lamar Jackson season we're probably ever going to get, in my opinion. I don't know if he gets better than this. Maybe not he might get better as a passer. I don't know about as a fantasy scorer, because at a certain point, I just don't think he's going to be running so much all the time. Eventually, he's going to slow down. Defenses are going to adjust. They're going to play this differently, but I don't see that coming exactly next season. So I think he's going to have a big chance to really go high in these rounds, and people are going to either overshoot for him in the first, or they're going to there's going to be a weird niche of people who are really looking at him as their second pick, or like their first pick even, especially depending on their draft order if you go by snake drafts, which is why a lot of people don't do snake drafts anymore, because who says that a random number gets to decide who I want to get? If I want to bid $80 on a Zeke or a Christian McCaffrey, I want to do that rather than wait and end up being pick number 8 involved in 12, and I get the bad end of the stick, right? So even people who put up for Lamar Jackson on bids, it's going to be interesting to see how much they spend for a quarterback now, because it's just been common practice that you don't spend that much. Where do you take Mahomes? Where do you take someone like a Josh Allen who might take a leap? Where do you take someone coming into the draft like a Joe Burrow, for instance? Joe Burrow is not a running quarterback per se, but he's mobile. He can move around the pocket. He can pick up some yards. He can definitely be a threat out there if he needs to be. Where do you take some of these quarterbacks who can, if the offense is tailor-made around them to do all the things that they're capable of at any level, like say if Tua decides to come out, right, as his decision is due the 6th of January, he's going to decide if he's going back to school or not. If he comes out into the draft and let's say the Chargers take him and they decide to develop an offense around Tua, who's to say he's not at least a 3rd round consideration, or like a high 4th round? You just don't know. Quarterbacks are getting valuable again. They're not just quarterbacks just do run in the mill. You can find any quarterback off the street and they'll get you average points that you need to get through and get to the rest of the league. That's been the common practice for many years. And I'm seeing now that people who had Lamar Jackson, especially, they got him at a value. Now we don't know if he's going to be at a value anymore. He might be at a premium. And other quarterbacks that are similar to his point output might be looked at a premium as well. And what does that mean? Other people, as other people pass up on certain guys, there's going to be more guys available. And you just never really know what that will mean. So that's going to be something interesting to look at as the season comes up, that I definitely will be checking out and seeing in mock drafts and just what people are thinking about. So after this last break, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about some more fantasy ideologies, some more fantasy thoughts coming right up.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
All right, so coming back, we talked about some Lamar Jackson. Where do we see him in the fantasy football draft scenarios? Where are we taking him mock draft stuff? And other quarterbacks of the same skill set or same point value, things like that. So now I wanted to look back at this season and talk about just one last thing before we head out for the evening. Let's just look at it like this. You're not stupid. This is my closing statement for this podcast. You're not stupid. If you looked at your team, let's say you drafted Alvin Kamara with your first overall pick over Christian McCaffrey. You spent the money, or you picked him and Christian McCaffrey was available. You're not stupid. It's not your fault. You didn't expect Christian McCaffrey to be the best fantasy back in football. You didn't expect that. No one did. No one called you stupid for taking Zeke over Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey. You're not stupid. It's okay. Life will go on. You will be able to move on with life, play fantasy if you still choose to. And if you don't, it's okay. There's more important things in fantasy football. You can get past that. But you're not dumb. Okay? It's okay. Take a deep breath. You're not dumb for believing that with Kyler Murray in an offense that seemed to be trending upwards as far as youth and people moving the ball down the field, it's not a bad idea that David Johnson might have been somebody that you wanted to pick up. You know, he's been in and out of the lineup for the past few years, but when he's on the field, he's very impactful and he could get the job done. So it's not your fault to think that he'd be out again. And worse than that, someone who people gave up on religiously decided to get traded there and be as everything that you'd want David Johnson to be ever, right? You just didn't think that. Another player from the Dolphins that's still on the Dolphins that you just didn't think had it in him, that everyone thought that he had the talent to do, was not picking up Devontae Parker in your fantasy league waiver wires, because I just don't believe he was drafted. I just don't believe that he got drafted unless you went deep. And if you're in like a 12-man or a 10-man, I just think he was on waivers for a long time. And I just don't believe, especially after how they started, that there was a need to pick him up. And when somebody did, and he's had a resurgence since getting the contract, and he's been looking really good. Same thing with Kenyon Drake. Since he was traded, he's looked really good. You're not dumb. You're not stupid. It's okay. Football is a very, very weird sport. How sometimes matchups are just different situations. Just change the momentum of different players' careers and different players' productivity levels. For instance, if you drafted someone like Julio Jones, and let's say you don't play PPR, life was a lot of struggle owning that young man. I say young man like he's not older than me, but that young man, it was tough. And if you drafted him in the first round because of positioning, or you just thought that you went wide receivers this year instead of running backs, which typically a lot of people do is go running backs and stock them up. I do that a lot. If I can get a good couple pair of running backs and then work the trade markets later on for when I need them, or if my running backs get hurt, which tends to happen more times than not, I have backups that can replace them. You know, you went wide receiver this time, so you might have picked up a Julio and you went and got Stephon Diggs, or you got an Adam Thielen, or you got somebody of that caliber, and you went double wide receivers in back-to-back rounds or something like that. You know, it was tough. It was you just didn't have the best season that you would like to have, but it doesn't make you stupid. You made a conscious decision. You made an educated decision, and it wasn't like you let yourself get auto-drafted or you just didn't have your reasons. And honestly, at the beginning of every draft, most people have found a way to make their decisions work for them, and it's really hard to say that they were bad decisions. Now, it's not like you went and picked up, Frank Gore in the first round. That's a bad decision. No one does that. No disrespect to Frank Gore. He's a quality starter running back in the NFL, but he's not a good fantasy running back at all, and hasn't been for quite some time, probably since he's left the Colts. Hasn't been somebody who you really can depend on in fantasy. You don't pick that in the first round. That's a mistake. That's something that you look back and say, wow, that wasn't the best decision I could have made in that scenario. But it's just so hard to say. I guess what I'm trying to get to is you can't look at your decisions in fantasy football retrospectively and just think that if I would have just drafted this, I would have had a much better time. Because you wouldn't have known that during the draft, or else you wouldn't have done that. And to be honest, during the draft, there probably wasn't enough evidence for you to believe that picking this person over this person would have such a dramatic impact on your season. When Alvin Kamara, I'm going to use him as an example, last year before the season started, he had like similar stats from year 1 to year 2. So you can only assume that by year 3, this coming year 3, he was going to have an excellent season. He did not have an excellent statistical season as he did year 2 or year 1. Christian McCaffrey had an excellent year 3 season. Both came in at the same time. Both produced same thing. Sorry, both did not produce the same numbers, but came at the same time, and they came around in the same sort of round. So same thing with Saquon. Saquon was going between 1 through 5. Like all these running backs, Saquon, Zeke, Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, probably the first 5 people off the board in whatever order you chose. And at the end of the day, it really just depends on what you believed. If you believe that Saquon could have really benefited from the fact that he was 1 year in the league, there's no way the offensive line could get any worse than what it was when he first played, that he would improve, right? Daniel Jones, you didn't think he was going to start, so you just assumed that Eli and him would click again, and there'd be more passes out the backfield, especially if you're in PPR, so points per reception. You just thought it was a better option to go for than somebody who shares carries, like a Alvin Kamara, or somebody who has been in a different country for the past month, hasn't practiced, anyone like Zeke Elliott looking for a contract, or you just don't know what kind of offense that the Panthers were going to try and get into, because Cam Newton was coming back and he might have been healthier than what we might have seen. So we just didn't know what we were getting out of certain players at a certain time. We didn't know how Alvin Kamara was going to be, because we always assumed that sharing carries might hurt his production value, even though statistically it just has not been the case. But you just never knew. So now we have a strong pool of data to look at this season coming up, and I just want people to know that no matter what you research in, you plug in, you put in your spreadsheets, you say this person should be best, this person is the optimal person to pick at this pick, this is the one that makes the most sense. Don't be surprised if a lot of people pick Christian McCaffrey, and then somehow, in some way, some fashion, it doesn't work out. Because that's fantasy football. That's how it works. It doesn't always work out. If you look and see, even someone like Lamar Jackson, like for me, I didn't get caught up in the Pat Mahomes hype, but I did draft him. Drafted him in the 4th round. So that didn't work out for me. So I had to start Josh Allen. And Josh Allen did the best he could for me to get me to where I was. I drafted Julio Jones and Odell Beckham Jr. back to back. That was a tough go. Did not do well in the season. But that's just how fantasy is. You can't look back retrospectively and be like, oh man, I'm an idiot or I'm stupid for doing this. Because you just never knew. You couldn't have predicted Odell would have the worst statistical season of his career. You couldn't have predicted that Julio would start off really rough as far as receptions and or targets, and someone like Austin Hooper would be really end zone threatening, especially early on in the season with the Atlanta Falcons. You couldn't have predicted that, but you're not stupid. And that's where I'm going to end off today's podcast with. So thank you for listening to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast hosted by GSMC Podcast Network. I would encourage you to like, share, subscribe to the podcast, leave us a good rating and review. And could you please follow us on social media? That would be our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. I've been your host, Ethan, and I hope you have an excellent rest of your day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.